Hi, guys. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are in the world. My name is Tande.Zw, as Arlington has said, and I'm so glad that you guys are joining us today for this conversation. Just to set the pace for this conversation, I think I'll just say this. Social stereotypes are very common, especially amongst our age group, our era. And because of that, you find that they hold different people hold different beliefs in their various social and identity groups. And I think that during this conversation with our speakers, we're going to unpack as well as discuss these different biases. So tune in, and I hope you guys have fun and are very, very interested in this conversation and just keep engaged. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Tana, for that lovely presentation. I guess you guys now have a better understanding on what unconscious bias is. So I guess we just get on with the program. So our first speaker will be Daniela Banda.
Okay, can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me to speak. This is such an honor and honestly an amazing platform that we're going to see growing. So, like you said, my name's Daniela and I'm based in Tennessee. I play golf now, but I started playing golf about 5 years ago. So my experiences of bias honestly started in Zimbabwe because, of course, we live in a patriarch society. And so when I started playing junior golf, something that was very apparent to me was how funding opportunities were first given to the men's teams as opposed to the women's teams. For example, in 2015, we traveled to Kenya, but prior to that tournament, we were made aware that the men's team was traveling and they were going to go, they had all the funding. And this was 3 months prior, and the women's team only received confirmation like a month before. So, and this happened many times. It happened about 3 times throughout the 3 years I played, where men were always given the priority. And this can be very discouraging for lots of athletes because you soon realize that if your own coaches don't see that potential in women, then it can be discouraging because they're kind of like your mentors. So honestly, what I want to focus on mainly today is talking about how do you overcome these situations, because unfortunately we can't change people's biases. We can only try and debunk them or prove them wrong, so to say. So one thing that was very clear for me, especially in golf, was to always bring your best self. So something that's important is always practicing, always showing up, always putting in your best effort, because this is what changes people's ideas of what women are in sports. So once you start showing that you are as competitive, you are as serious, people start to change their preconceived ideas. And also one thing is this, I've heard this quote many times, is you have to stay ready so you don't have to get ready. And that's very important in that you never know when an opportunity will come to you. So always make sure that you're at your full potential when it does come. And I think we'll continue to see discrimination in women's sports as long as the pay for women in golf and tennis is not the same. So I think one thing I want to emphasize on that is always make sure you're at your best self or trying to be. Then something else that happens for me and for anyone who's here, who's based in the diaspora, is when people have an idea of who you are, whether it's about Africa, what sport you play, what you do. So something that happens to me often, because I do go to what we categorize as predominantly white institutions, is I tell people I'm a student athlete, and the first thing they'll say is, oh, you must play basketball or like soccer or something like that, because those are the sports they associate either people of color or Black people play. So, and then oftentimes when I tell them, oh, I play golf and I played in Zimbabwe, they're like, oh wow, you started learning golf in Africa, and Black people play golf in Africa. So there's a lot of education that needs to be done there. So I believe even though it's not our responsibility to debunk people's biases, it is an opportunity to educate them. So always take an opportunity to talk about where you come from. And also, I think this also pushed me to be the best representation of either an athlete from Zimbabwe or being a golfer from Zimbabwe. So something I like to do is constantly push myself and put other people on the map as well. So one thing I always do talk about is the different minority golfers we have, but also other Zimbabwean golfers we have, like Scott Vincent or Ben Follett-Smith and Rumbi Masambu, making sure you're saying the names of people who are there and also being, the best person you are. And then one thing that's important to realize is to not carry these judgments. So as you start to realize that a lot of people will say certain stereotypes about where you come from, make sure you don't start to have the bias that, oh, Americans are this, so Americans say this, because this is how the cycle starts. So make sure you're not carrying those implicit biases as well. And then one thing for me that's also happened is in the workplace, it's when you work in an industry that does not have a lot of minorities, you soon realize that you'll be the only one or one of two or three. And for a lot of people, that can be either discouraging or it puts them in a certain feeling like imposter syndrome, because they then have this pressure to be the best they are, or they feel like they have no one they can relate to. So one thing I would encourage that I did in my internship at the LPGA is to take on projects with people you normally wouldn't. So make sure you're constantly speaking to different people, making sure you're part of different meetings, and also have people who are your mentors. So something that's very common in the US is they have resource groups. So whether it's women in Latinx or Black women in code or girls who code, those organizations help you because you have people who have been through the same experiences. So once you start to have mentors who can encourage you, but also give you actionable steps, you're less frustrated, but you're also not as overwhelmed. So that's definitely something that helped me throughout my internship. Is my manager was I was the only minority and Black intern, but also there were only 2 other Black employees of a company of about 200 people. So initially there was that imposter syndrome of, oh, I'm supposed to really show up and represent all the Black people in the golf industry. But at the same time, she was definitely very helpful for me. So find someone who you can relate to, but also someone who can walk you through how to overcome those thoughts. And then also, so this is definitely one of my least favorite experiences I've had in the US is with my own coach. And this is because he's never had any minorities on the team. He grew up in an environment which was predominantly white. And so sometimes he would not include the minority players in the conversation. So for example, I am the only Black teammate we have us and have those conversations with us. But I soon realized it was unintentional, because something I've realized is sometimes when people see someone they carry a bias with, they tend to believe this is your one shot, so you're expected to conform. And you won't complain about certain things because this is your one opportunity, right? So it's important to have those conversations. If you feel as though someone had a stereotype or a bias towards you, definitely bring it up. And if it's in the workplace, of course you have to take it up with HR, but make sure you have your tabs. So examples, emails, conversations, because the worst thing is some people don't take bias as seriously because they've never lived that experience. So you have to show them tangible examples. And the last thing I just want to say is always make sure you're working from a point of your strengths and not your weaknesses. When I first attended my first conference, this was in South Carolina, it was a golf event. The first thing was thinking, do I even belong in this place? This is my first conference. What conversations do I have? And that was already me telling myself that I didn't belong in the room. So it's important to tell yourself that you have the opportunity and the platform because you earned it. So always work from a place of your strengths, because if you also operate from weaknesses, immediately it clouds your thoughts. You forget everything you went through to earn it, and you start thinking about everything that is against you, all the odds against you. So make sure you operate from a place of knowing, first of all, you belong in the room, but also you've earned the opportunity. And just like everyone else, you have a lot of things to learn. So I think that's pretty much most of what I wanted to speak to you guys about. But yeah. So I can take any questions now at the end whenever we're doing them. Yeah.
Okay, questions will be taken in now. So guys, if you have questions, just send Simba a private message and he will meet you and you guys can ask Daniela some questions. So
okay.
Yeah.
Hey Danny. I hope you're fine. I've got a question here in the private message. It's asking, how do you then deal with the pressure of being expected to represent a whole race?
Yeah, that's a good question, because that is a lot of pressure. I think I would say that unfortunately for some people, they will always, because they encounter very few people of a certain race or age group or maybe demographic, they'll always see you as a representative. I have a lot of people who still will ask me questions about every country in Africa, but I haven't been to every country. So I would say, like yourself, you just have to remember you are an individual, but in everything that you do, people will still sometimes see you as the only group. But I think that just comes with wanting the best for yourself.
Okay, and I have a personal question. So bias has made your journey much harder. Well, I assume. But when you then achieve the most that you can, is the victory somewhat more sweeter?
Yes, I would say it is, because at the beginning, when I started playing golf, there was a lot of, they call it ageism. I don't like the way the word sounds, but when I started playing golf, I started at 15. And a lot of people start playing golf when they start walking or they're 4 or 5 years old. And so when I remember mentioning to a coach, oh, how do I get a scholarship to go to the US? And this is, he was the white coach in Zimbabwe. And I think a part of it was his bias as well. He hadn't seen other Black women play golf. And he said to me, oh, well, I think it's kind of late. My sister played for Zimbabwe and she got a scholarship, but she started when she was 5 years old or something like that. So immediately, this is a coach, which could be a mentor for you, but he already imposed that he didn't believe it was possible. So I wouldn't say the victory is sweeter in the sense that along the journey, you realize you're empowering other people, but also you realize your responsibility to set the tone and make other people believe that they have what it takes. So it is definitely sweet, but not in the sense of revenge, more like resilience. Yeah.
Okay. I think we've got a question from Tana here.
Okay. Hey, Daddy. Okay, so my first question is, I think the topic of unconscious bias, in as much as it has so many negative connotations, the truth is it actually can work in one's favor, right? So I would ask you, what are certain scenarios, I guess, you'd give to where unconscious bias has worked in your favor?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It requires a lot of deep thought, but I would say in so many cases, because I have been the only one, I think about playing golf and the workplace. You feel empowered when you can change people's idea of what they bring, of what certain people bring to the table. Like I think about my internship and how they often have very few minorities, but when people tell you you've done a great job and you're one of the best interns they've had, you then realize that not only have you represented yourself, but you've changed the idea of what they might have had about different interns, or that they might bring on more diverse interns. But I guess it works in, honestly, the only way I can think about it working in my favor is that I think you really turn the tables. Like I think about home a lot, in that when I think about sports, is a lot of women want to play sports, but the least retention is in women, because when they get from 13, 15 years old, they believe that they can't get the opportunity, or they see men's sports constantly being funded. So they realize that they're not a priority. So I think my journey then helps represent that we can have those opportunities and we deserve them. So I think that's where it really becomes, I guess, empowering.
Okay. All right. I think I'm still unmuted. Yes. Okay. And then my second question was to do with when you came over from Zimbabwe to America, that shift to a position where in Zimbabwe, I guess, the unconscious biases are more or less in our social periphery. So let's say we're all Black, most of us are Black, and now you're changing to a situation where it's you're coming from a majority to a minority. How is that in terms of your personal growth? And like outside of golf, outside of your career, you as a person, how were your unconscious biases changed?
I'm going to take a second on that one. I guess it's in terms of, I never really had any biases about Americans prior to coming to the US. I think just because I kind of had a bit of exposure to, I had spoken to a lot of, teammates and people abroad, finding out what the experience was like. But I guess one of my biases that did change was, it's very hard to think about your own biases. So right now, that's a very tough question. Wait, can you just repeat the question again?
Okay, so coming from Zimbabwe, where you are part of the majority, and then moving to America, where you're part of a minority, what are some unconscious biases that you had before that then changed with that transition to living and studying in America?
I think one thing for me that I thought when I came to the US was that everything in sports was going to be extremely competitive. Like I thought everyone was going to be, waking up at 6 or 7 a.m., training super hard, spending hours on the golf course, or even in their classwork, like the discipline would be very high. But I soon realized that it wasn't the same for everybody, because I think we come from a place where every opportunity is important, or it's your personal choice to believe that. I personally believe that every opportunity can lead to something. So I soon realized that when you come to a different country where they have numerous opportunities, they don't see discipline the same way as you. So that's definitely something I had to debunk. Is if I wanted to, when we were in Zimbabwe and we played golf all day, people here didn't want to do that because they thought, what's the point of doing that? There's so many other things we could be doing. So I realized that discipline is defined differently, and also opportunity was defined differently.
Thank you.
Any more questions, guys? Okay, thank you very much, Daniela.
Thank
That was
you.
enlightening. And if you have more questions, you can just keep them and we'll ask her at the end of the Zoom call. Anyways, I'm gonna hand it over to Tana now, who's going to introduce our next speaker.
Okay, so once again, hello. Thank you guys for staying engaged so far. It is my honor right now to introduce to you Ms. Sandile Nkala, I hope I'm saying that right, who is an aspiring accounting professional, wearing several caps already as a brand ambassador, a presenter, a motivational speaker, and I like to call her on Grand Fam because she is such a phenomenal woman. So everyone, let's listen up. It's Sandile Nkala for all of us.
Hi everyone, can you see me? Can you hear me? Awesome, thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm so happy to be here. Hope you're all well and safe, and I'm really happy that both genders are actually taking part in this discussion. I think that's important. It takes two to tango. So let's get started. I'm sure everyone knows what unconscious bias is, but let's just revise the definition and source one more time. I just want these certain words to resonate in your mind. So unconscious biases are learned stereotypes that are automatic, unintentional, deeply ingrained, universal, and able to influence behavior. So you heard it right. The issue is stereotypes. As humans, we tend to categorize the world, social and physical, into little groups. We learned them from our parents, teachers, peers, and like the video that we watched earlier said, the biggest culprit, media. However, as we know, they've had disastrous consequences on the basis of race, gender, ethnicity, disability, and sexual orientation. Our focus today, though, will be the gender bias women face every single day all over the world. Please remember that the issue is not just some men, which we may all like to believe, but women too. That's an unpopular opinion, but we have to talk about it. So here are some of the examples of the craziest stereotypes I have ever heard in my life. So here's the first one. Okay, you don't have to get so emotional. And I've seen that a lot of people use that as an argument for why women can't be good leaders. And the next one is, oh, you're so beautiful. Why do you work so hard in your career when you can just find a rich husband? This is the assumption that a woman's greatest achievement is marriage and that their career isn't really important. The next one is female brains just aren't as logical and technical. And I'm speaking this from like the accounting point of view. I get these comments quite a lot, which is so ironic because I feel like I'm rocking this degree. And yeah, this is the assumption that women are more suitable for non-logical jobs, the low-paying ones like admin and, teaching, but not STEM, the high-paying jobs, the ones that people are willing to pay more for. So I know there are people that don't actually believe that this actually happens. I'll call them the naysayers, the deniers. So let me flex on you with a statistic. One study found that both men and women prefer male job candidates, so much that in general, a man is 1.5 times more likely to be hired than a woman. Even women would prefer to hire a man. So yeah, generally, that's just how the world works. And 1.5 times is a pretty significant figure. So let's dissect where this comes from a leadership point of view, because I've held a lot of leadership positions. So I've always tried to understand why people were so hostile towards me as a woman. And this is kind of what I found out. So generally, women are perceived positively on the whole, as you're stereotyped to be supportive, nice, and gentle. But we all know, everyone is different, regardless of gender. But however, this disappears and even reverses the moment women step into the domain or otherwise challenge stereotypical expectations. For example, people subconsciously prefer male to female authority figures, and we can see that with the number of male presidents we have in the world. Male to female leaders, non-feminist women to feminists. Oh, the hate towards feminist women, that's a conversation for another day. Female students actually subconsciously prefer housewives over businesswomen. And it goes with guys. They don't like to have women that seem more powerful than them, so they seem to go for someone who's equal or subordinate. So when we talk about why there's more male presidents than female ones, the issue is not about capability. It's about the subconscious human sabotage of us just saying it cannot be that way. It has to be this way, therefore I will not support it. So I'll talk about my personal experience as student council president for you guys to better understand how I've personally gone through this. So the first time I applied to be student council president, I actually didn't get the role. It was me and this guy, and I knew that I was more than capable for the role, but he obviously won, and I saw that coming. And this idiot, had the nerve to say to me that women can't be leaders because we're a bunch of gossips, and if we're to take leadership positions, then we'd spread the huge secrets of the company. I know it doesn't sound real, but he actually said that to me. And so I was like, fine, no worries. I was set on proving myself and proving that I was definitely capable of the job. So he slagged in his role as president. I'm not saying males are not good leaders. That's not what I said, but they are good leaders. Be bad leaders and good leaders in both genders. But yeah, so I took over, and as vice president, I was taking over his roles. I worked 10 times harder. The next year I became student council president, and I worked 10 times harder as well, which moves on to the statistic that says women are good leaders, better leaders than men. And I don't think it's because of our DNA that, women are better. I think it's because we are forced to work 10 times harder. And so that's why we sometimes emerge as better and the best. So how do we then move forward? I don't have to tell you great examples of women in leadership positions. We know them, but we won't acknowledge them, some of us. The Prime Minister of New Zealand is doing a great job containing COVID-19, but everyone is looking for many other reasons for why she's doing a great job, but her own capabilities as a person. Sorry, when I talk fast, I actually begin to, I'm trying to keep with the time. So yeah, as we know, prevention is better than cure. So I feel like the first stepping stone would be to first encourage equal participation of women and men across traditionally gendered social roles. Once all doctors, drivers, nannies, and world leaders are split fairly between male and female, and we see this represented by the biggest culprit, media and elsewhere, over time, we can now actually start to look at ourselves, yourself as an individual, and really ask yourself, am I doing a lot of these unconscious biases? When I said that to Simba, was I being sexist towards him? You know, you have to hold yourself accountable. Tell yourself that you're a human being and you'll always have an unconscious bias. And so whenever a stereotype runs into your head, you're like, no, Sandy, don't do that. Because I live in the Middle East. So you can just imagine the amount of stereotypes I had when I moved here. So I really had to challenge myself. And I think meeting people from different nationalities also helped me become more open-minded and really understand myself and challenge myself and become a better human being. So yeah, guys, that's my TED Talk for the day.
Thank you. I think a couple of people have questions. So if we start
Sure.
with Kudzai, I think she had a question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, Sandile.
Hi.
Doing amazing.
Thank you, you too.
Having come from Zimbabwe, a young developed girl, I understand you spent some years in South Africa before you went and settled in Dubai. So what biases did you face transitioning as a new girl in all of these different cities and different countries? And what advice can you give the young Black girl looking to try new things? Like, people are held back by, apart from just unconscious biases, that doubt, that one thing, that one time that guy said to you that honestly all you guys do is gossip. You could have just been like, you know what, he's right, I'm worth nothing, but you didn't do that. So in growing up, transitioning to where you are now, what did you personally face other than that student council situation?
Okay, so yeah, like you said, I moved from Zimbabwe and I went over to South Africa. What I loved about South Africa is how dynamic their society is. They're talking about this actively. But there's a lot of hostility towards Zimbabweans, as we know. We have a stereotype. They don't like us, and we are there to take their jobs, right? So there was a lot of hostility towards me. And even like at school, people expected me to have this sad story about Zimbabwe. But, you know, because we went to the same school, we had a pretty decent upbringing, and trying to get that across to people, like they just didn't want to accept it. They did not want to hear it. So that was challenging. And like you said, sometimes you're forced to put yourself in that stereotype. But I just knew who I was. I remembered who I am. I had a list of things that I stood for, and I stood by them. And I'm the kind of person that's not afraid to stand alone. So even when people were horrible to me about it, I was fine. See, now moving to a different African country is, you know, somewhat okay, but moving to the Middle East was a different ballgame altogether, because now you carry the stereotype of the African, you know, the stereotypical poor immigrant. You know, you came from nothing, you live in a hut, and you run around with lions and elephants. It doesn't even sound real. I don't know why people do that. So there I am, and I'm speaking English, and people always say to me like, oh, did you grow up here, or did you grow up in Africa? And I'm like, no, I grew up here in Zimbabwe. I grew up in South Africa. And they're like, and you speak English like that? You know, people have these really backward mentalities. And here, as a Black person, as a Black girl, I've had to fight 10 times harder for people to recognize me for the person that I am. That means dressing well. That means talking well. That means, you know, carrying myself in a certain way, just for people to respect me as a person. But then again, I could have fit into that stereotype of an African and be like, okay, if that's what everyone says I am, that's what I am. But no, like I said, stuck to my guns. I know who I am, and I will stick to being the person that I am. Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
I think, yes, we've got another question from
Okay.
Tande.Zw.
All right.
Thank you. Let me just unmute her. Wait a second. Oh, you can just unmute yourself, Tana. It's fine.
Okay. All right. Perfect. So first of all, Sandile, nice to virtually meet you. Thank you so much for redefining and setting a parameter, another parameter to this conversation, which is unconscious gender bias. And I think I love the way you started by talking about what it is and then getting deeper into how it affected you. I think one of the question marks I personally put on the definition of unconscious bias is the fact that people say it's unintentional and automatic. I think the future of actually, I guess, tackling unconscious bias is moving it from unconscious bias to becoming conscious biases. So it's more of we're making them unconscious and automatic, we're making them conscious and non-automatic so we can actually tackle them. So now my question to you is, since you are aspiring to be an accounting professional, knowing accounting and how generally the world of accounting is, what are the ways or the steps that you are equipping yourself, I guess? How are you equipping yourself for the corporate world in general?
Okay, so I believe in something called personal branding. I know my boyfriend's watching. I always preach this to him as well. Personal branding is key. So basically, you want to set yourself apart from everybody else. You want to set yourself apart from everybody else, that when you're not inside a room, people say certain things about you, right? But how do we then make that possible? In the world we live in, social media is key. Even when I've applied for jobs, the first point of reference is my LinkedIn or a website or your social media. So delete any unwanted tweets and tweets that you don't want people to see. But, you know, so as an accounting professional, what I have begun to do is to not just focus on my accounting degree. That's not going to get you a job in a top company. I think we all know this. You have to do internships. So I've done 3 different internships across different industries. You have to volunteer. You have to show the employer that you're willing to do more than what is required, you know, for you to stand out as the right candidate. I took up positions in the council, you know, to do extra stuff so that I do continue to stand out. And then I just revamped my CV. I revamped my LinkedIn, and I'm just constantly active in my social media, the business side, just to prepare myself for the future and for my career. Because right now it's all going back to personal branding. And not just that, even the way you dress, even the way you talk, even the way you act as a businesswoman is important. So, you know, and then obviously knowing your skills, but, you know, like I said, it's not just about your knowledge, it's not just about your skills. All these other things I mentioned are very important. Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right, you're welcome.
Sandy, we have a question from Daniela here. She says, how do we debunk our biases about gender coming from a society of patriarch, or have you seen people doing it effectively?
I mean, I come from the same society, and I've had my own mother say things to me that were pretty sexist as well. You know, I've grown up with it. You go to family events, you're expected to go to the kitchen, and the guys are just standing around doing whatever. And it's very hard to unlearn what you grew up with. So I've seen a lot of my girls come from similar societies. And what you end up trying to do is to be like, you get to a certain age and you're like, okay, yes, I've grown up this way, but this behavior can be unlearned. So like I said, it goes back to making a conscious decision to be like, that wasn't okay. So let's go back to square one and unlearn all those beliefs and turn it around. And then another way that I tried to debunk those unconscious biases is by watching women who have achieved those things that they say we cannot achieve. You know, looking at the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Michelle Obama, all those people. Oprah, she's a Black woman and she's a billionaire. You know, it's possible, it's there. So you have to surround yourself with those kind of things. And even people, your friends, you have to surround yourself with people that have the same mentality, because if you continue to hear that, it's going to be very hard for you to break out of it. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Okay. We have a question from Arlington as well.
Okay.
Okay, so I realized you're also like a motivational speaker, and obviously the males are like the top of motivational speaking. So I wanted to ask, how were you like able to like overcome that and actually be on top and keep on succeeding? And yeah.
Okay, so I have attended this conference where women were discussing, you know, the whole thing of being a woman, being a man, and everything. And the best advice I have ever received is, don't look at it as You're a woman doing motivational talking with other guys. You see yourself as a person, as a human being, going to do your job as a motivational speaker, you know? So you've annihilated that pressure of, I'm a woman. And you just go there and you do the best you can. And I believe in letting your work speak for itself. So I know that I'll go on that stage, I will do a good job. Me being a female is not really a problem. As long as I do what is required, then it's done, and people respect me as Sandy Lenkala and not as that girl that does motivational speaking. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Dave.
Let me. There's two more questions actually. The first one is, how have you dealt with the narrative that she's pro-female, so she's probably against men, or she probably hates men?
That one is hard. You know, people label me and attack my personality all the time. You know, I've been called all kinds of things. I've been called out B a lot of the times. So I've had to build some tough skin. That's the truth, because I can't control what everyone says. You know, I can't change the world, but I can control how I react towards it. So yeah, I've built some thick skin, and for me, I don't believe that, you know, it's all about hating men. And I always try to explain to people that are willing to listen that that is not what it's about. And I always try to explain to them, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And sometimes I get the message across and sometimes I don't. But, you know, some people do become aggressive, but that's okay. Just, you know who you are. Like I said earlier, you know who you are, you know where you're going. If other people don't like where you're going, then leave them. They're not paying you. So why should you care?
I think I've got one last question for you. It says, okay, if I try hard to go against these unconscious biases, could that not end up me developing the other bias? So developing how can I put it? Does that make me then develop another bias that's opposite of my original bias? E.g., gender bias, I could end up being pushed to appointing a female CEO just to fight my bias against male CEOs.
I think that happens. I think it happens pretty often. But like, I don't think, you know, unconscious bias is something that you just do and it's done. I think it's something that happens until you die. You have to fight it until you die, because you're a human being. As a human being, you're always going to get various biases. You know, I've lived in 3 different countries and my thought process has changed every time I moved. So it's just a never ending thing. But like I said, what we are fighting for is for people to be recognized for their capabilities. Always remember that. So if now you're just putting people because they're a woman, then we're not solving the problem. You know, we want to hire people because they're capable, and we want to make sure that everyone has the skills and the opportunity to become who they want to be. So yeah, so just hold yourself accountable till you die, basically.
I think one last question. It says, how can you help the less confident woman to stand up for themselves and stand out?
That's an interesting question. But yeah, the less confident woman. I was also less confident as well. But where do I start? But you know, okay, nobody can give you confidence. I think we all know that. It has to come within yourself. And things that help me. So I'll just explain what helps me to build my confidence. I know this sounds very sexist, but I like to start with my appearance. You know, when I look good, when I dress good, then I'm confident, because I know that I'm rocking this world. And when you look good and you know your knowledge and you know your expertise, then you have belief in yourself, knowing that you can do it. Right? And also practice. As a speaker, I could not speak. When my mom told me to start public speaking, I was like, hell no, I'm not doing that. But, you know, my public speaking teachers did help me, and I would practice in front of the mirror. I would practice with my friends. And now I've reached this point, I'm still learning, and my confidence is still growing. So that's the great part. So keep practicing, do things that make you feel confident, do things that make you feel good about yourself, and also surround yourself with friends and family that are going to lift you up and not bring you down.
Definitely. Well, I'd like to say thank you for that. That was very motivational. I think I'll take it back to the hosts. Not too sure who's taking.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
It was
you.
nice talking to you all.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll take it from here. Thank you very much. Anyways, our third and final speaker is Elizabeth Banda. Okay, so twin sister, and basically she has also achieved a lot. Former Rotary Youth Exchange student, Zimbabwe karate captain, Forbes under 30 scholar. She has also attended key conferences and programs. Summer Discover School, Forbes, DPT, and she's currently majoring in sports medicine. So I'm gonna give it up to Elizabeth, and yeah. Elizabeth.
Thank you, Arlington, for the introduction. And thank you, everyone, for being here and spending, just a couple of hours with us and engaging in this conversation. So I feel like I had a couple of things I could discuss. Being a past exchange student, I've experienced quite a lot of racism. I think we all have. But I really wanted to focus on something that I felt like was more inclusive, that I think we don't think about more often as far as biases and labeling. So I wanted to talk about my experience as a two-year student, a two-year community college student. And I think it resonates with a lot of people is because what you notice is when you attend a non-target school or work for what would be a non-target corporation, people tend to label you a certain way. So what do I mean by that? So a two-year institution is when you start your 2 years at a school that then you then transfer to a four-year institution. So instead of attending maybe a bigger university, like I'll just of course be straightforward and say Harvard or the Ivy League schools, which would be more respected. And instead, when people hear about your school, you're often met with the reaction of, oh, that's where you go to school, or oh, community college where the lazy students are, or stuff like that. You know, that's a lot of things I've heard. And I just wanted to continue and say the common labels that I've heard a lot is either the students are lazy or you're rejected from a four-year institution. So the only way to get your continue your academic journey was to go to a community college, or you're underqualified. So automatically people assume because of the way you started your path, you're not going to get into, I guess, a good four-year, and then your journey just overall is going to be mediocre from there. And I think when you also look at being Zimbabwean, I will say back home, I know students who have attended a four-year institution at a crazy expensive price because they felt like they had to prove themselves to their friends instead of starting off at a more affordable journey, which is why actually a lot of people attend four-year institutions. So in my experience, I know we don't have too much time, but I just wanted to give you guys a few personal experiences of what's happened to me or just what I've experienced. So one time I had a professor tell me I wouldn't get into a program because he said, so this is what would be called in-group favoritism. He said, they're not looking for students like you. And it's crazy because I'm actually attending the program this year at Duke University, which they have the number 7 in all of the 300 institutions that have a DPT program, and I actually got into the program. But he had told me I wouldn't get in because I was a community college student, and I've always gone to conferences and events, and every time I introduce myself or people look at my LinkedIn, and I think they don't realize that tone can be biased as well. And that's one thing I researched and learned is when someone says something to you like, oh, I didn't know you go to a community college student because of your qualifications. I didn't know you're a community college student because of your qualifications. So ultimately what that is people assume that because of your foundation, and I think a lot of us can relate when it came to high school, where you go to school, people assume your financial status, or people assume just, I guess, how your family is and what your school system would be like or what opportunities you have. And then I also wanted to get into horizontal networking and how it affects that. What I've noticed amongst peers is that people tend to only respect you or give you more respect. And this went around on social media when you have a certain brand name to you. So I know for me, what was super hard, and I'll admit to this, was when I started community college, I didn't tell people where I went to school. When I left for the US, I felt like people weren't going to, I guess, respect me because they automatically only want to respect if you go to a big school or an Ivy League. And then I guess the other issue is that we tend to see in horizontal networking, people want to associate with you only after you have certain achievements. So for example, after you become a Forbes scholar or after you have, I guess like my sister, she's helping so many people now. And I think at the beginning, people don't want to see that from you unless you have a certain brand name to you, which is, I wanted to get into the strategies that I've used and what's helped me and also helped my mindset positively instead of being negatively impacted by biases. I wanted to say the first thing I think is you have to get credible qualifications and attend events. So when it comes to qualifications, no one can take that away from you. So for example, if you attend a conference, for example, like my sister went to NSN and she was the top 7 pitchers out of 300 students that attended and was selected out of over 700 applicants. And what you see from that is no one can take away that you performed and you now have that credibility. So what I also take as a positive from people when people say to me, oh, you went to community college, is that they see my qualifications and they now change their mindset of what a community college student is like based on the work that I've put in. And then the second thing I wanted to also say is just make sure you're an asset. And as an asset, I mean, when you walk into a room, make sure you deliver. So when you feel like people may have a certain impression, or you know that people are expecting you maybe to under-deliver, just have the confidence and know you deserve to be there, which is something Sandile and Dengela have both said. So I thought that was great. And then the second thing I wanted to say was have a discussion and always let people know that maybe you don't appreciate those comments. So for example, one time I was at a conference and a lot of people were talking about having mentors and their mentors being very accommodating of their schools and their structure. And sometimes a lot of people don't want to mentor to your students because they're not sure how serious you would be or how serious you take the opportunity. And I know I stood up, this was my first conference, and I said, at my school, we don't have those opportunities, and I would love to have a 4-year mentor or someone that would be willing to at least help me with my transfer process. And I know the ladies on the panel said they were willing to help, but after the conference, a lady came to me from Wheaton College, which is on the East Coast, and she said to me, I would love to work with you. You stood up today and you're amazing and confident. And since then, she's helped me. She actually helped me get into the DPT program this summer. So the last point I also did want to say was, make sure you're also aware of stereotypical threats. And this was one thing I wanted to mention is sometimes when there are biases or stereotypes, you feel like you have to conform in order to, I know Daniela mentioned this earlier as well, but I feel like in order to fit the mold and you have to be a certain way. So for example, I know with, if you want to work in tech, in the US, I know for sure, people always think they have to work for Microsoft in order to be valuable. But if you feel like, honestly, that is not the path for you, or that's just not the stereotype and the mold you want to fit, allow yourself to work for that non-target company. Allow yourself to take the journey that's less traveled, but can still lead you to a great place. And the reason I say that is when we look at Walt Disney, he started at a 2-year institution. Or when we look at Mark Cuban, he didn't go to a pedigree university. He started at University of Indianapolis, which of course, if you took a student maybe who was an Ivy, people would respect him less. So yeah, and that almost concludes me. I just have one more point, and I just wanted to say, just also know that your self-identity should not lay in what people say, but instead choose to see your worth and just be confident in everything that you do and the choices you choose to make, because there's so many opportunities. Just because you start somewhere that seems lower, it doesn't mean you will stay there. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I'm more than inspired at the moment. That was really great. Thank you for that. First question that we have, it's how did you become a Forbes scholar? Forbes under 30 scholar.
Okay, so as a Forbes scholar, Daniela and I both had friends who had been Forbes scholars previously, which is, I think this is great, goes with my first point of marketing yourself and qualifications. We spoke to our friends who had been Forbes scholars and we told them we were interested, and I think it was part of my vision board as well. So as soon as the application came out, which they give you essays to write, they ask about what projects you're pursuing, and then you apply, and then they let you know in a couple of months and a couple of weeks how you do. And the amazing thing for me was, after pursuing the opportunity, my school was willing to pay for all of my expenses to go. So yeah, just making sure you market yourself, and it was an essay and application.
Oh, okay. We're gonna try that. I'm sure a lot of people are gonna look for those applications now. I think Tanatswa has a question. Tanatswa, if you could just unmute yourself.
Okay, first of all, guys, I absolutely enjoyed listening to the past 3 conversations because I mean, I made a new friend today, Sandile. You're gonna be seeing me in your DMs, by the way. But yeah, it's always great to listen to these conversations and hear what they have to say. I like what Liz said about credible qualifications. I'll just have to ask you. I know some of the qualifications that people are looking forward to doing, you either have to pay or they are with institutions which are, let's say, in the UK or whatever. So just a question. This is to my Zimbabwean friends or my friends who are in South Africa or I don't know, any other country. What are some resources you think they can tap into to get these qualifications that are not necessarily like in America or just, in America only, but they can tap into out of America or any other country in the diaspora?
Okay, that's a great question, and I think it's perfect timing because as we're in quarantine or I would say the pandemic, a lot of resources are free right now. And one thing my sister and I both do is we create resource lists for people. Like if they choose to get on a call with us, we actually make them and help out. So a great place right now is LinkedIn Learning because LinkedIn has actually made their courses free at the moment and you can tailor it according to what you're trying to learn and what skill you're trying to build. So LinkedIn, regardless of where you are, will definitely have those free. Nikon right now has their photography course for free. So if you're looking into photography, another great place, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but Tableau, they have a business course as well for people. And if you're looking, I know a great thing to do is on LinkedIn, make sure you also get a LinkedIn, is look up the hashtag opportunities student resources, because a lot of people right now, and my sister just put a couple of resources in the chat, is they're offering their courses for free. So definitely check that out. And Harvard is also offering courses for free. So there's a lot of resources, I think. Just make sure you're looking up on your Google searches, student recruiting resources, student opportunities, free resources and courses, because there's a lot out there. And also just focus in on what your career field requires you to have, because that's the best way to go about it, because you don't want to overwhelm yourself with how many websites there are out there. So focus in on what is desirable to make you more marketable. And yeah, YouTube is another great resource. But LinkedIn Learning, I feel like, is a great start. And then from there, you'll find more with the hashtags.
All right, thank you so much for that. Just another thing, just to bring it home, I know that Liz was talking about all these resources that you can tap into, as well as her experience that she has had, coming from community college to just comparing all these things. And I know that many people in Zimbabwe can kind of like relate to this, because there's been this whole thing of, oh yeah, if your university is university of something, keep quiet. If it's not Harvard, if it's not Oxford, I don't want to hear it. And I guess at the end of the day, it's how you use your resources and how you're able to tap into what you have, taking opportunities and just tapping into them. But just from that, I would ask you a question that many people always ask, but how do you stay determined and motivated despite all these unconscious biases that come from knowing that, first of all, you are a young Black girl in America who's studying sports medicine. I mean, I was looking at the statistics of your degree. Not many females are even doing that at all. So how do you stay motivated and determined despite all these things that people have to say?
That's a great question. And for me, the first thing I always think about is, so I fit into the mold of a stereotype back home, which is daughters of single parents are not expected to honestly do well. The stereotype is that you either get pregnant and you don't finish school, or you marry, I feel like a rich guy, or just get married, or you just choose to not do anything with most of your life. So that's the biggest motivator first, seeing my mom work so hard. I know it sounds cliche because people talk about their parents being their motivation all the time, but that's the first thing for me. And then the second thing is, I think I've fallen in love with personal growth. I know I overwhelm myself with overworking sometimes, but I think when you follow your passion passion, one, which is what my major is, sports medicine, being a past athlete, that allows you to keep pushing forward and keep building. And I also love documenting my story. So if you follow my LinkedIn, I try not to keep my LinkedIn posts just achievements, because the algorithm favors those more. But instead, I always try and keep telling my story of, at first, I changed my major and this is what I learned from it. And people love hearing that authenticity. So that also keeps me going. Because when people give you that feedback of, I resonated with this, or you taught me this, or I'd love to work with you. Because one thing that motivates me is speaking at events. Because in the past, like 2 months, I've spoken at about 4. And that just keeps me motivated, because I know that what I'm talking about is making sense, and that keeps you going. So that's definitely my motivation, trying to build communities, making my family proud, and yeah, just I think breaking the status quo of what would be a single parent child back home. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got a question from your sister, actually. She says, can you talk about the transition of being an athlete to a non-athlete? Were there any challenges or biases to not continuing your journey as a competitive athlete?
It's in general, to answer the first question, is that transition is very hard, especially because if you know about my community college, it's actually a sports community college. We actually have a Netflix show that was filmed there, and most of our population is athletes. So the hardest part at first was I had to unlearn what I thought my identity was. Because back home, everyone knew me as the karate twin and Daniela as the golf twin. And I kind of felt like my worth was taken away, because that's what I was glorified as or seen as. That, of course, it was a passion. It wasn't just something I did for the medals. So that was difficult, but the transition and what I learned from that was not to put my identity in one thing, which is, I think, great for this topic, because whenever you represent yourself, even if you're a Black woman, you don't have to, Sandile talked about this, you don't have to walk into a room and see yourself as, because she said the female motivational speaker, she just sees herself as a speaker. You don't have to see yourself as, I'm the Black girl that's trying to represent the whole Black community. So yeah, it was definitely difficult, but one thing I would encourage anyone, if you're trying to figure out what the next step and next direction is for you, experiment with so many things. Because last year I attended a hackathon, I went to conferences, I definitely did, I feel like a fair share of different activities at my school. So yeah, the transition is difficult, and self-identity and self-worth is constantly changing as we grow and experience different things. Like, I know for sure, I mentioned racism earlier. When I was on exchange, I know this doesn't relate to the athlete question, but when I was on exchange, I heard a couple of things of people would say to me, oh, you must be so grateful to be in a place that's civil now. Like, because, civilization of what they assume would be that back home there isn't any civilization, or that we don't have roads or any sort of education system. So those types of things. And when I think of labeling, and it's similar to the community college thing, I just told myself that I'm not one thing, but instead continue to evolve by experimenting. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We've got a question from Tamuka. And Tamuka, if I could ask you to just unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Simba. Thank you, Elizabeth, Daniela, and Sandy for sharing your experiences. I think Sandy mentioned something which stuck to me early on when she spoke about unconscious bias is a learned stereotype, and it could also be associated with behavior. And we know behavior as an element of culture in it. So how do we address unconscious bias culturally as well? Because sometimes it's very easy to see what's further away, and it's not easy to see what's right in front of you. So as to say, it's easier to see your feet than it is to see your eyelashes. So sometimes how do we also tackle it in the home, even before we get to the actual office? And a supplementary question of that would be, how do we stay aware as well that this is unconscious bias, so as not to add to it or normalize it, so to say?
I would say, sorry, just answering your question based on a video I watched earlier this week. One thing I know for sure that helps is they say when you meet different people or people, what are the first thoughts that come to mind? Because that's actually, I mean, it's of course they say unconscious, but you can actually debunk and look at what are the first impressions you make based on people. So when you see a person who doesn't look like you, what was your first assumption? And I also think being empathetic with people's stories, because I honestly have noticed that many times when we make an assumption, it's because of a negative story that we've heard associated with, like, so for example, right now, everyone probably, when they look at some white people who would look like a redneck to them, is they're thinking about all the racism that's happening. But being empathetic, I would say, just before you make an assumption or say anything that you think would be offensive, think about what is their story and ask them what it is. Or yeah, I just think that's the best way with bias, is taking courses, because there are courses that help you address how to speak to people, how to make sure you're not being stereotypical or offensive. And yeah, that's what I think. I don't know if the question was for Sandile, but I just thought of that because I saw there's a Harvard course you can take to see what your biases are.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Shamiso as well. Shamiso, if you could just unmute yourself.
Okay, so Elizabeth, considering that you've attended like a lot of events and everything, and the application process for most of these events require like your resume and some type of essay, do you have any type of basic advice you can give for writing those essays as well as building up your CV? Like, do you have people you can recommend to help us with building our CVs and like some tips for writing the essays?
My tips for writing the essays, I would say always closely follow the prompt, because they say where many people go wrong is they don't answer the question. So always follow the prompt. And I always think of the unique traits that you can offer to them, because many times when you go for events, it's an investment both ways. They're thinking about what can we gain from you, and you have to tell them what you can gain from them. So always try not to be generic. So for me, for example, I'll just give you guys one tip is if you're community college student, I always mention that my school doesn't have those resources, so I want to learn from them and be able to bring back the resource to my own school. So if they teach us about personal branding, I can have a personal branding workshop at my school or make a post about it on LinkedIn, because I usually do video recaps. So that for sure is talk about your story very closely and don't be generic ever. And with resumes, general tips, of course, they say no spelling errors, no typos. And also make sure it's tailored to that specific opportunity. So never send in a generic one. So if it's a conference for finance, make sure you're putting all, that the opportunities you've had in finance or your interests. And you said any specific people. If you are on LinkedIn, I definitely would look at College Code. They have a free LinkedIn resource, and they put out a lot of information, conferences for students. To be honest, if I'm being honest, a lot of my resume help has come from my sister, because she's had a lot of experiences with not only employers telling her hers is great, but them telling her what works and what doesn't work. But reach out to people and ask them to look through your resume, because many people are willing to tailor and edit it, and also ask them to read your essay for sure. Like, I think that's the best advice I can give is just be yourself, own your story. And your story is so just to finish off that point, is your story is what makes people empathize with your journey and want to give you more. Generic points don't add value to anything, because if you say, I just want to network with people, what does networking mean? What do you want to learn from people? What can people learn from you? So getting into those deeper points of, I was an exchange student, so I can talk about cultural experiences. I'm from Zimbabwe, so I can explain to people what our cultural background is like, stuff like that, depending on the opportunity. So yeah.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much for attending this online conference. It was definitely a very interesting conversation. Thank you to Elizabeth, to Sandile, as well as Daniela for just dropping so many gems today. I think